Now, if you get this track in less than 10 seconds, I'll be very impressed.
Michael will change his middle name to Robert.
No. Michael will not be allowed to give a 5 as a score for 1 month.
Hey, there it is. All right, guys, welcome back to episode 5 of our podcast. We got some exciting stuff to share today, and we got a lot to cover. But first, how was your guys' week? Do you guys have anything fun to share, interesting happen to you this week?
Diana got sprayed by a skunk for the 6th time. That did happen.
The 6th time, wow.
6th time. My wife and I have our skunk spray deodorizing formula and methods down pat at this point.
I feel like we should clarify that this is your dog, not like your daughter or something.
That's a good point. Yes. Yes. Diana is my dog.
I had a little bit of an interesting thing happen this week. I got old. I turned 29 this week.
Happy birthday.
It was a very work-filled day. That was exciting. I was going to hang out with my girlfriend and we were going to do some stuff, but she got sick. So that's going to be a rain check.
Bummer.
But enough about that. Let's hop into our reactions and our reviews this week. Robert, you had one that the composer of the soundtrack, I believe, was featured on, was it Assassin's Creed Valhalla?
Yes, she was, and Assassin's Creed Origins, for those of you who like the Egypt one, Sarah Schachner.
You reviewed Prey this week. One
of the few new movies that I have seen before I listened to the soundtrack. Which, if you haven't seen Prey, go watch it on Hulu. It was fun. It was well done. It's one of those movies that the soundtrack is really important for because there's so little dialogue. So the world is filled. It's either going to be silence or we're going to be guided through it with the soundtrack, which Schachner did a great job of. Similar to Assassin's Creed Valhalla, there are tense moments that are not harsh, I guess is the best way to put it. Where you can listen to the soundtrack all the way through and be like, oh, this is a tense moment, especially for a Predator film, but you can listen to it. There are some movies where it's just too brash and too harsh, and you're like, oh, obviously this is action or evil, but I'm just going to skip this track. I mean, heck, there's even 1 or 2 tracks in the Lord of the Rings trilogy I often skip for that reason. No. I know, shocker. But yeah, just some cool things. A great theme. I found myself humming the theme from Prey, which...
It's a good sign.
In my opinion, and it seems like, in my book, a great theme needs to be hummable, so she succeeds there. She also, interestingly, found a Native American flute maker and player, Robert Mirabal, on YouTube, and was like, I've got to get this guy in my score, right? Because it's a Native American story, the Predator prequel. And I want to say he only features in 1 or 2 tracks. I could be wrong here. I'm willing to be corrected, but I definitely would have loved to have heard even more. He even does some singing. It's well done.
Was he in any of the top 3 tracks he listed?
That is a great question.
I really enjoyed Naru's Way.
Same.
Yes.
I think that was your one. That was a beautiful, beautiful track.
Yeah, that's the main theme for sure. Naru's the main character.
Okay.
That's what I figured. I need to watch that movie still. I have a sour taste in my mouth from the last Predator movie they did, which is just terrible. But I hear nothing but good things about this one.
Same.
So.
Yeah, I've heard some really good things, which is, again, refreshing because I also didn't expect much from another sequel.
Agreed. Yes, especially a prequel. And this is actually the first Predator film I've seen, so I might be getting in
really
where it's good. Yes. And then,
I mean, it sounds like they did something different. They completely took it out of the modern era, which is an interesting twist for sure.
They did. Yeah, it was well done. So yeah, this is a great listen start to finish. So yeah.
I was really intrigued by Michael's high praise of his week's TV soundtrack he did, because you said it was excellent ambient music and just great for I imagine moody writing, because I was listening to your top 3 and I was like, this is very dark. I want to hear what your thoughts are. You go a little bit more into the depth about you did Dark. Was it season 1?
Dark season 1. And what stuck out to me with this score is it's very ambient and very dissonant in a way, and foreboding is another way I'd describe it. But it doesn't fall into the trap of feeling too ambient in a way where all the sounds and themes just all meld together into just ambience, you know. Mm-hmm. It is very recognizable, and I noticed that it has a way of making sounds sound unique to the score. So with a more ambient score like that, it's harder to have like, oh, you can't have a hummable melody
Right.
because the music is more undertones and textures. So it does a really good job of creating a sound and textures that feel very unique and more recognizable. And that was the metric I was measuring against for this score, was how does it compare to other scores of this genre, so to speak.
Right, because that's what I was initially a little surprised when I saw your score. But then I was listening to it, I was like, okay, I'm never going to put this on in the background when I'm like just looking to be cheered up.
Oh, for sure.
Or just, you know, cooking or whatever. But this is definitely one I think especially writers could probably get a lot out of if you're writing something in more of a moody sphere. I don't know why it was reminding me of like Shutter Island and stuff like that, and maybe even Prometheus. I know Prometheus is quite an ambient score as well.
Right.
Robert, what did you think of his top three? Did you give those a listen?
I did. It's clearly very effective for what it is. Now, I haven't seen the show. I hear it's excellent.
It's really good. I haven't seen the whole thing, but I've seen some of season 1, and it is really good.
Is it along the lines of Stranger Things?
I would say it's a little more thematically intense.
A little more dark?
Yeah.
So many puns. So many
right?
puns.
It seems like that's one of those scores that really, I mean, does the job well and does what it's supposed to, because it definitely puts you on edge.
Oh, for sure.
I will say it is interesting, though, because the difference between your score on that and my lowest score of all time I give to Ozark, it was very similar sounding. Which for me personally, I'm scoring this on, am I going to listen to this? Is there any purpose I'm going to listen to this for? And I was like, well, I guess if you're trying to get in that mood for some sort of writing piece, sure. I'm never going to listen to this again, and I hate it. And I might get roasted for that, and I don't care, because that one was, in my opinion, it's a terrible soundtrack to listen to. Probably works for the show very well.
I hear it's good when you're dumping your cash into your washing machine, too.
Yeah, probably. One that I reviewed this week, though, I reviewed a game this week that is ambient in the best way possible and is very listenable, and I've already listened to it several times as I'm working in the background, and that is Firewatch. What's interesting about the soundtrack is that the composer was also the game designer.
I saw that in your review, and that was fascinating. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, I feel like I might have heard of it on some indie games.
Jasper Kidd did that originally when he first got his start before Valhalla. He was part of the designers for some video games before he really got into composing, yeah.
Okay.
I believe
so
it was Jasper Kidd.
Huh. I mean, what's great about this one is because he was a game designer, Chris Remo was able to incorporate the feel he wanted from the music. Like, he had the feel, like, in the design of the game, that this kind of feeling of smallness, that you're in the middle of the wilderness, and it's just the kind of grandness of that whole landscape. And he wanted the music to kind of go along with that and not be too overpowering. And it's nothing too complex. It's a very subtle, kind of subdued score, but I just really liked it. And I think it probably achieved what it set out to do. I have not played the game, but it's definitely one that I will be revisiting, and that's why it got such a high rating for me as well.
Yeah, I was listening to your top 3 on that one, and I this is definitely going on a chill playlist from mine.
Yeah,
I love the simplicity of the tracks and the score. The spaciousness of the motifs does lend to what the composer said about reflecting the player's smallness in the game.
Yeah. Robert's being awfully quiet over there. I'm wondering if he absolutely hated my top 3 or what he thinks.
Yeah, I really enjoyed them. I actually did listen to the whole album.
Did you?
And I was just pondering on the ambient qualities of this one versus dark. And I think it was the sort of minimalist ambient that allows you to just kind of, as Michael said, let it breathe and relax into the motifs and into the themes, whereas dark, I think, was a little more chaotic, right? It was a little less minimalistic, if I remember correctly. So yeah, different kinds of ambience for sure, but good chill music here for absolutely.
It was only 33 minutes, which is very short for a video game soundtrack. I opened it up this week. I was like expecting this long soundtrack. I'm like, oh, okay, well this won't take long.
I'll have to check out the game.
Yeah, it definitely seems like one you could kind of just it would be calming.
Something that comes to mind about this soundtrack and about how the motifs play out. Again, they're very minimalistic and spacious. It reminds me of some of the tracks in the soundtrack for the game Fallout 4. And what that makes me feel of like is this vast expanse, that kind of drawn out, like a lot of spaciousness within the motifs. I've played a little bit of Fallout 4, and so I wonder if this game has a similar kind of like feel, as the composer said, the player's smallness.
Right. I mean, I would say Fallout 4, in my opinion, is a little bit more melancholy in tone. I think it uses more piano, correct?
Oh, yes. And that's not necessarily the comparison I'm making. It's more so of the spaciousness of the
No, I
melodies.
completely understand, but that's like, it's so interesting because that's the spaciousness of like desolation. And then you got Firewatch, which has those plucked guitars. It's just kind of almost awe-inspiring in a way of, I just imagine you looking out on this vista and just, of nature and whatnot.
Yes, indeed.
Moving on to our Never Gets Old this week, which I think is not ambient in any way, but a beautiful score from what I listened to it. Robert, what'd you have?
Yeah, Romeo and Juliet from 2013 by Abel Korzeniowski, if that's how you say it. This one's often on in my house, and so in some ways it is ambient. Because it is minimalistic, it's ambient, right? So that kind of music, the music of Philip Glass, Max Richter, those style of composers is just often easy to put on in the background while they carry themes, and this one absolutely does. If you've never heard it before, as my wife put it, this is the definition of gorgeous music. If somebody says, like, give me a gorgeous album, it's Romeo and Juliet. And the shocker is that Korzeniowski was brought on in the 11th hour, like at the last minute for this project, and pulled off. I haven't listened to all of his music, but it was probably one of his best albums. And I think he would agree with that. Apparently James Horner, the late great James Horner, was scoring this movie, which went through all kinds of development and production hell, and the director decided at the end that he didn't want James Horner's score, and he brought Abel Korzeniowski on, and Korzeniowski honored his faith, I suppose you could put it.
I wonder, did he use any of James Horner's motifs at all, or incorporate them at all, or just completely redo it?
I didn't see any indication that he did use any of James Horner, yeah.
So somewhere out there, there's an unused score for Romeo and Juliet of James Horner.
Yes. No, a lot of this information I'm indebted to Synchrotone, I believe, synchrotone.com perhaps. He had a review, and that was one of his laments as well, is that we'll never get to hear what James Horner did. Maybe it'll get released someday when the rights and the legal issues are not there. But yeah, beautiful piano melodies, the strings that just soar together and back up the piano all the way through. Really interestingly, the piano is definitely dominant all the way through until, I'm going to spoil Romeo and Juliet, because if you don't know the ending yet,
at this point,
you're probably 5 years old. So in the death scene, right at the end, the piano goes away completely, which I thought was so cool.
Wow.
And then it's strings, and they bring in this sort of angelic choir sound. And it's also the best version of the Romeo and Juliet death scene that I have seen yet as well. So yeah, listen to the soundtrack. You can listen to it for anything. It's often in the background when I'm working, or just, to calm down, to chill out.
Mm-hmm.
Just listening to the top three, I was like, this is kind of similar, on par with Pride and Prejudice, I'd say. Would you agree?
Oh, it's even better. But yes,
Better.
Similar music.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a rare 5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah.
I think because it is the highest of gorgeous. Like, The Lord of the Rings is the best, but this is probably the most beautiful soundtrack I've heard.
I will have to give that a listen, because I listen to Pride and Prejudice quite often.
Same.
Especially when I want that calm,
Same.
Yep.
I love what you said, can pass for concert music. And that when I read that in your review, I was like, okay, I'm sold. let me save this to my library.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I would pay decent money to go to a concert hall and hear a live orchestra just play this beginning to end.
Yeah. It's crazy that was just a last minute ad.
I know. Sometimes, some people work really well under pressure.
Yeah. It's always cool to have a surprise like that. It's just, the music's gorgeous. Another surprise was Bear McCreary on Rings of Power, because I didn't I didn't know he was that versatile. I mean, I guess I haven't listened to a ton of his stuff, but I know he did obviously The Walking Dead and Black Sails, which are both kind of more gritty soundtracks. But you had him for Composer Spotlight this week, Robert. Did you find anything interesting about him you wanna talk about?
Like you said, he's not a composer that I've listened to often. He really came to the forefront thanks to Rings of Power, as he will for a lot of people. But he's been around for quite a while. Was apprenticed to Elmer Bernstein, who's known for Ten Commandments, Ghostbusters, the original Magnificent Seven.
Wow.
He's considered an icon in Hollywood music. Apparently, the story I was reading online, Bear McCreary was just a 16-year-old, composing music, and he was writing films so that he could compose music for them, as he put it on his website.
That's funny.
And he had a chance encounter. He lived in Bellingham, Washington, which is a port city up in the very top of the country, northwest. And Elmer Bernstein pulled in his boat at some point, and somehow they bumped into each other, and Bernstein saw his talent and encouraged him to go to USC and took him on there as a protege. So McCreary has paid his dues in the industry, right? He's learned from a master and has learned from his own projects. I think his first one was the renewed Battlestar Galactica. I haven't seen it, but I know there are a lot of fans out there. And then he's done a lot of horror and monster films, as you mentioned, Steven, Walking Dead. He did, I haven't listened to the whole soundtrack yet, but what I've heard of Outlander is gorgeous, more Scottish sounding.
Yeah.
Of course, the Norse sounding God of War. Not my favorite Norse soundtrack, but it's solid. And the effort he seems to really put into making scores sound unique and evocative is really impressive, and trying to be authentic.
Right.
So, really impressive guy, very gifted, very well educated, varied in his talents, but his Rings of Power soundtrack is not my favorite.
I know we talked about it a little bit in the reaction, but there were some tracks I actually really enjoyed. Overall, kind of, it was above average for me. It was a good soundtrack, but it didn't blow me away. I ended up giving it a 3.75 out of 5.
That's pretty high for you.
It is, because there were some tracks that I can't deny were really beautiful tracks. I didn't hate the soundtrack. I thought it was a good soundtrack. I think I was trying to look at it objectively outside of the, scope of, okay, this is the successor to Howard Shore in terms of a composer for the Middle Earth. There were some tracks I was really impressed with, but overall I wasn't too blown away by it. And I know we talked about how if it had been edited down and to a shorter album, it might have been higher, but that was kind of my thoughts.
I think that's why it suffered the most in my eyes. I think if it had been edited down, it would have been a lot stronger of a soundtrack. And still, granted, it doesn't hold a candle to Howard Shore's Lord of the Rings, but I think it would have been a lot stronger if it had been edited down from its current runtime of 2.5 hours.
Right, and last thing I'll say is I think the biggest disappointment of it, to be honest, was Howard Shore's main theme, because I was really hoping for something at the level of Lord of the Rings or even The Hobbit. But no shade to Howard Shore, because I love his work, but I was not too impressed with the main theme for the Rings of Power.
Yeah, if you watched our reaction video, Bear McCreary won that contest.
Michael, what were your overall thoughts and impressions of the soundtrack, and since we listened to it in whole?
Yeah, like I said, I think it suffered the most from the fact that it was not edited down. It's 2.5 hours long, which I've noticed that as being a trend with a lot of soundtracks these days. They don't edit them down as much. There were tracks, however, that I absolutely loved. I love Galadriel, but I actually loved the track Valinor even more. And that theme that's in the track Valinor is just beautiful, and it shows up throughout the score. It's probably the one that comes the closest for me to Lord of the Rings, but again, as a whole, was not impressed overall with the soundtrack, though there were a few tracks that would be a 4.5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, I think I scored it the lowest out of the group at a 3.5 out of 5. However, I'm willing to modify that somewhat after I see the show. I'm curious how much of the music is going to really enhance what we're seeing on the screen, as the soundtrack should, and therefore improve the music. Because I know there are moments in the Fellowship of the Ring I'm thinking of specifically that are more subtle pieces, but are really enhanced by what's going on at that moment. And once you tie the image, the emotion, and the music together, I wonder how much that's going to enhance the music itself, if that makes sense. Because one thing I did notice with this soundtrack was that I think McCreary is telling the story, which is why you get flyover tracks, right? Which are kind of like, there's something going on here, and this music serving as an emotional backbone to it, but I'm not quite sure what the context is. Especially, I think the broken line is a longer one. There's a few longer ones towards the end where it's like, all right, there are things ramping up here. There are hints of motifs. I'd really love to know the emotional context.
Right.
One thing I will say that I do really like, that I noticed in quite a few tracks, is they feel like they build to a flourish at the end. And we noticed that in, I forget which one when we reacted to. There was one of them that might have been Cause of Doom, but I've noticed that in several of the tracks. And several of them do it in a way that I absolutely love. It's just gorgeous.
But begrudgingly, I'm going to say the name of this next section. Guess that track, because I still don't love that name, but it's the name we got for now. And Robert is in the hot seat this week with a track selected by Michael. And I even don't know what track this is, but Robert does not know either. And so he's going to give a countdown and give that a listen, and let's see how fast. I'm going to time you this time.
Now, if you get this track in less than 10 seconds, I'll be very impressed.
Michael will not be allowed to give a 5 as a score for 1 month.
Hey, there it is.
All right. This was sent to me in an email. Okay, so it'll play right away as soon as I start click the email, apparently. So I'm going to... I haven't listened to it yet. Okay, so I guess I'm ready.
All right, give a countdown and go.
3, 2, 1. Oh my gosh. I know what this is. Braveheart.
Yes, sir.
For the love of a princess.
Nope. Yeah, I'll give you
Oh,
another
sorry. It's Gift of a Thistle.
There you go. Very good.
You gave him a Gift of a Thistle. Wow. It took you 15 seconds.
Dang.
Not too
I
bad.
gotta
Not
say,
shabby.
Now, it was at second 13 that the motif comes in. I was like, he's going to get it here.
Yep.
But the fact that you guessed did he guess the track within 15 seconds as well?
Yeah, it was a second guess, but no, I stopped the timer at 15 seconds.
It was around 30 seconds when I got the track. And
it's under 30.
Gift of a Thistle, what was it? Was the moment in the movie that was in my head, and I don't know why For the Love of a Princess came out.
Yeah.
Shame. You missed one. No, that was pretty good. That was impressive.
Good track, Michael. Little too easy for me.
No, I wanted to find one that from a soundtrack I know that you would guess immediately, but find a track that would take you a little longer to get it. And that's why I'm like, oh, this one, the first 10 seconds or so is a little more subtle, maybe not recognized right away, but I'm impressed.
Yeah, that was good, Michael. That was good.
Yeah,
those opening violins, I've heard, you can hear those in lots of movies, right?
Yes.
So it took a second to get there, because I almost actually thought How to Train Your Dragon or Jason Bourne of all things. So it was sounding like a John Powell track, and then the tin whistle comes in, if that's what that is, and that was
all
that.
right,
Thanks,
so,
Michael.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that wraps it up for episode 5. Do you guys have any parting words today?
I don't think so. Look forward to seeing you all next week.
You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and that'll be linked in the description, as well as our sign-up page for the newsletter. We put out the weekly newsletter where we review all the soundtracks and have the scores up there. Make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and those will all be linked in the description below. Oh, and don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. That'll help us out a bunch too. See you guys next week.